Waste giant Veolia has been fined £3 million after a man died and another was seriously injured while decommissioning a North Sea gas rig back in 2019. Stephen Picken and Mark Kumar were working on an onshore facility in Great Yarmouth. Both men were working as demolition operatives, undertaking the decommissioning and dismantlement of offshore structures. On the 17th of October 2019, the two workers were removing an overhanging piece of metal pipework known as a skirt pile. It weighed in excess of 27 tons. On its way down, the pile struck the mobile elevating work platform, or the MUP that they were working from, threw them to the ground 12 metres below. Stephen Picken died tragically at the scene, and Mark Kumar suffered serious life-changing injuries. An investigation by the Health and Safety Executive, or the HSE, identified serious failings with the planning and the risk assessment, which did not adequately cover the planned works. Shortcomings in supervision of the incident were also identified. The company did not assess the skirt pile being removed as it was considered low risk. As a result, there was no cutting plan or safe system of work for the skirt pile. Veolia has pleaded guilty to breaching Section 2-1 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, and they've been fined £3 million in order to pay £60,000 in costs. Now, let me take that away for just a second. Need to get to the right place. Now, a couple of things out of that, which I think are worth addressing. You may have known, or you may have spotted over the weekend, I do have something to show you on this as well. Let me get rid of that. I'll show you this one instead. It's this. So that is a brand new 31,000 ton gas rig or oil rig, Shell Brent Charlie topside, that has been towed into Teesside for dismantling. We've had an incident at Great Yarmouth, and now we've got another of these rigs coming in to be dismantled. This is a subject that I've been talking about for quite some time. Obviously, we are coming to the end of certain of these oil and gas fields over in the North Sea, and rather than leaving them, rather than leaving those rigs in situ, they are being dragged back to land and dismantled and demolished. To my mind, this is a brand new form of demolition. It's something that we haven't done before. And when you look at the makeup of these rigs, and I'll throw that one back up on there, I don't know, there's a better picture of it. No, that's probably the best one. As you can see, those rigs are very much unique. They're very top heavy. The structure is virtually all above sea level. And you've got these spindly legs that go down to anchor it onto the seabed. So, for one thing, they are quite an awkward thing to demolish. They're also incredibly big. I mean, that I don't actually know the height of that. Does it mention it in the article? 31,000 metric tons. No, it doesn't appear to say the height, but it you can see it for miles around. There's another photograph of it there. You can see the absolute size of that. It really is a mammoth beast. So, a couple of things. It's a new form of demolition. By and large, this is demolition work that's never been undertaken before. Is the use of things like MUPs and high reach excavators really the best way to go about this? If you've got a unique structure, a unique set of circumstances in where it's located and how you work on it, could we not have gone back to square one and said, actually, is this the best way to go about this? And even further than that, one of the things that strikes me about the dismantling of these oil rigs and gas rigs is the fact that there is a huge amount of money being set aside for it. So it did offer us an opportunity. It gave the industry an opportunity to take a big step backwards and say, okay, bearing in mind, I wouldn't say money is no object, but you could take a big step backwards and say, could we do this in a different way? Could we, for example, put them on some sort of turntable? Bear with me, some sort of turntable, and rather than actually having excavators having to reach up and MUPs having to reach up, do them from the top. So have suspended attachments nibbling away, gradually bringing it down to the ground, keeping men and women way out of harm's way. Could we not have come up with a better way of doing this? And bearing in mind the fact that we've already seen accidents happen with these things in the past, is now not a good time? We've got a lot more of these to come. I don't know how many of the rigs in the North Sea will be coming to shore to be dismantled, but around the world, bearing in mind oil and gas deposits are depleting, we are moving more and more to sustainable fuel sources. So regardless of where you are in the world, and the UK is certainly not unique in any of this, there's going to be rigs around the world. Could we not, as an industry, sit down and say, given the fact that this is a new form of demolition on a new form of structure that virtually nobody has ever dealt with before, could we come up with something bigger, better, different? And following on from that, if you are going to be taking down, let's say, a high rise office block or a high rise apartment block, we've got experience in that. The industry has got lots of experience in that. With lots of demolition companies have done lots and lots of tower blocks, lots and lots of bridges, and we have experience with that. We can call on past experience, and we can also call on established training regimes to make sure that we are working with the structure in front of us in the best way possible. As I say, we've got lots of experience to draw upon. With these structures, like these offshore oil and gas rigs, we don't have that. So, my question, going back to the Great Yarmouth thing, was what training was given to the two guys that, well, one was injured and one was killed? What training was given to those guys? What special preparation were they given, bearing in mind that they were now working in a very specialized application? Were they just given, I don't know, working at height training, which goes part of the way? But when you look at the makeup of these things, and even this, I'll go back to the article itself. Yeah, the company didn't risk assess the skirt pile being removed as it was considered low risk. As a result, there was no cutting plan or safe system of work for the skirt pile. You might argue, and this is not for me to do, you might argue that Veolia should have seen that coming. But if they've never done it before, and I don't know if that's the case, if nobody's done that before, how would you know? Now, I'd like to think that anybody involved in any future rig demolitions will now be aware of the potential danger of removing a skirt pile. All 27 tons of it. This is public domain stuff. We know exactly what it is we're dealing with now. I'd like to think that going forward, we will be aware of that and we will take the necessary risk assessments and put in place cutting plans, safe systems of work, RAMs, and all that goes with it. But let's be absolutely clear here. We're dealing with a completely new form of demolition that virtually nobody has done before. We're dealing with structures that nobody's had to dismantle before, in an environment that nobody's had to deal with before. This is new. This is uncharted territory. Should we not, bearing in mind there's so many more of these to come, should we not be, as an industry, be taking a really big step backwards and going, okay, stop. Let's take a moment. Let's pause. Let's think about exactly what it is that we're doing before anybody else is injured or before anyone else is killed. I'm going to take a very quick break from that, go over to the chat. Dan Cullen says, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe. See you all tomorrow. Like what I see, Eddie's sitting on a sunbed reading about me in Earth Movers magazine. He probably is as well. Demolishing an oil rig. Wow, what a job to have. Yeah, absolutely. Did Fred not have a video of that demolition from top down? Not an oil rig, he didn't. No, we have featured here the demolition of that oil rig up here. They used 7,000 tons of material for it to fall on. Yeah. But again, one of the, I think the one that Steve is referring to there was a structure or a rig that was taken into Scotland, brought onto land, and they blew the legs out from under it. If you want to go and have a look over on YouTube, you can find a video of that. It's on our YouTube channel, actually. You can go and see that. And basically that brought it down, sat it level because they considered the legs were a bit spindly. They could support the weight, but once you start affecting the weight, if you chop up a piece off the side, the thing becomes unstable and unbalanced, and therefore they needed to get it down on ground level, which they did very successfully. But there's the thing, even that alone is a new form of demolition. When you take down a tower block, let's go back to tower blocks, an apartment block or an office block, you don't half blow it down and then manually take it down or take it down mechanically. The only time that ever happens is when the implosion goes wrong. So you either blow it down and the whole thing comes down and then you worry about clearing up the mess afterwards, or you do it as a top down with high reach excavators and you nibble it down. So the very fact that it was partially blown down before being handed over to big excavators, that is a new way of doing things. We were talking here yesterday about, and my day's column today is about training and competence cards. What is the competence card now for dismantling an oil rig or a gas rig? Is there one? Yeah, bearing in mind we've had one person killed and another very seriously injured. Should there not be? Should we not have that sort of thing in place now? Mick Norton has joined us somewhat belatedly, but he's here nonetheless. A lot of operators were saying it's harder to tear apart with it demolished. Would have been easier doing it without blasting it, says Steve. Again, there's a bit of me that looks at it and you think, I can fully understand the sense of bringing it down in that way. I really can. It makes it more accessible, but it also puts it on a more firm footing. I understand that. But the very fact that they, and I don't know what level these people were at, but the very fact that they're now looking at and thinking, maybe that's not the best way to do it. Is it? Let's be absolutely honest. Is this being made up as we go along? Is that what we're doing here? Are we taking, a multi-million pound, hundreds of thousands of tons of steel, putting it on land and just going, oh, we'll do it like we do most things, and it'll be fine. Is that what we're doing? And one of the things that I find frustrating about this, there was I did try to find it this morning. I can't find it, but I do remember reading somebody has invested. I think it was it was either £1 billion or €1 billion or $1 billion. It was a billion of something in the creation, the building of a purpose-built tug to bring these rigs back to shore. So the oil companies and the gas companies have set aside £1 billion, euros, dollars, just to get these things back to shore. I'm not saying the demolition industry should be rubbing its hands together and ripping anyone off. But if the gas and oil companies can afford £1 billion just to get the thing back to shore, surely they can afford £500 million to put together a program of how these things should be done. And when you think about the presence of people like Marco Lorini over in Italy or a Rush over in the Netherlands, even Kukurik here, if you said to Marco Lorini or David Kukurik or Ruud Schreier over at Rush, we have an oil rig. It stands 30 stories tall. It weighs 31,000 tons, and we are going to demolish it. How would you do it? Do you really think that their answer would be, oh, yes, we'll use a high reach excavator? Would they? Or would they say, actually, given the size and the shape and the fact that there is so much overhang, when you demolish a tower block is that shape. I can't. I've got nothing to hand to show you the shape of an oil rig, but it's a mushroom. It's got a smaller base, but it's got a big top. Is a high reach excavator really the best way to tackle that? Steve says a demolition of a fixed rig would be better than demolition of an unstable rig, would it not? Very unpredictable after it fell. I think the idea of getting it down was to put it on a more level footing. And again, listen, there are much smarter people than I that are doing this kind of thing. But if that's standing on legs and you take too much weight off one side, whereas if you've got it on a flat base, it probably matters less how you change the balance. That is my guess, but I'm, as I say, not an expert. Oil companies do spend lots of money, but see, when we was drilling, if it got stuck or something broke, 50 grand downtime they pay. So probably keeping money for that. I'm sure that is the case. But here we are. So Veolia has just been fined £3 million, and one guy is dead. How many more will need to die? How many more £3 million fines will have to be levied before everybody just goes, do you know what? Let's have a think about this. Let's have a think about this. And also think about the makeup of a rig of this description. Steve, you worked on them. You know what they are. There's lots of steel. There's almost certainly some unpleasant nasties, chemicals and asbestos and that kind of thing. I'm sure there's a fair degree of that in there. The shape of and the size of the things is unusual. All of these things, it's almost like a perfect storm demolition job. It's top heavy. It contains some unpleasantness. We've never done it before. And yet we seem to be going a bit gung-ho. Anybody think that? Mick Norton says there are breakage yards worldwide who specialize in dismantling of large rigs and vessels. There are. However, we featured this before, though, okay, some of the yards worldwide that are dealing with some of the larger vessels, shipbreaking and that kind of thing, they tend to be in places like India and Pakistan and what have you. And the health and safety levels are very poor, but they are deadly. Those facilities, those breakers yards have deaths on fatal accidents on a regular basis. We here in the West, in the first world, we should know better than that. We shouldn't. We can look at them and multiple deaths. We could have the same if we're not very careful. If we don't use this incident at Great Yarmouth back in 2019, if we don't use that as some kind of learning opportunity, um, first and foremost, Stephen Pickham will have died in vain. But also, we could have more Stephen Pickens in the future. That is my concern. If anybody's got any more takes on that, and on the subject, I'm glad Mick Norton's joined us, because Mick sent me over a thing yesterday, and I was going to do this as a standalone. In fact, I may still do. I'm going to read to you what I've written here, and then we can have a chat about that afterwards. I'm coming at this from a demolition point of view, although, as you will see, this is from a quarry point of view, but you'll get the idea. We're constantly told that justice is a wheel that turns slowly. We're constantly told that authorities need time in which to carry out accident investigations. And we are constantly told that we can't speak about fatal accidents for fear of prejudicing future possible. Let me try that again. We're constantly told we can't speak about fatal accidents for fear of prejudicing a possible future prosecution. That's why we're still waiting for the Didcot inquiry to deliver its findings more than 8 years after 4 men were killed. It's also why we're still waiting almost 5 years after a tragic accident claimed the lives of 2 more workers at a demolition site in Redcar. And that's why it's taken almost 5 years to investigate and prosecute Veolia over the death of Stephen Picken at Great Yarmouth. It doesn't need to be this way. Earlier this month, a man was killed in an incident at an overseas quarry. His leg was crushed by a wheel-loaded tyre while he was fixing a puncture. He died from his injuries a few days later in hospital. The Safe Quarry organisation reported that incident to its members across the mineral products industry. It recounted a similar incident that occurred on a site here in the UK back in 2019, in which another man was killed in a very similar incident. Safe Quarry has already provided its members with a set of learning and action points, together with links to further information and resources. They've responded quickly and efficiently. They've embraced a tragic accident as a learning opportunity. And at no point have they prejudiced any forthcoming prosecution. The quarry sector can take details of a fatal accident and use them to make their industry better. The powered access industry can log each new incident and accident and fatality and use that to inform training in their sector. And yet in demolition and construction, we just continue to wait for those wheels of justice to turn. How does that make any sense? How does that make any sense? I can't imagine for a millisecond the prospect of the NFTC getting anywhere near an oil rig demolition dismantling. Okay, so here's the thing. And listen, I am critical of the NFTC on a regular basis, which is why they don't speak to me at all anymore, but that's a whole other story. But who did the Great Yarmouth job actually bought KDC Contractors, which is an NFTC member to this day, as far as I know. And they bought it for their ability, their capabilities in this kind of environment. And they're not alone. There are NFTC members that are active in this kind of industry. They're also over in petrochemical. They're also in the nuclear industry, and so on down the line. Even the NFTC, I think, would admit that this is demolition, but it's not. It's such a new challenge that it almost lives on the periphery of the NFTC. The NFTC membership are, most of them, are very good at taking down structures, bridges, tower blocks, houses. They've spent decades doing precisely that. But even when I think about the companies that I believe to be the creme de la creme in terms of professionalism within the demolition industry, companies like Armac and AR Demolition and people like that, would they take on an oil rig? Probably the chances are AR and RMAC are probably would be considered too small a company to be handed the contract to do it. But even with all of their expertise, I think even they would. I think they'd say that sounds like a challenge. But I think even they would go, Christ, that's a that's a problem to be solved right there. We've not done anything like this. And bearing in mind that the way that duty of care works and the way in which contracts are let, there is often in the letting of demolition contracts, there is this weighting system, WEIGHTING, weighting. Are you going to employ local people? That will, if you are, that sort of swings things in your favour. Obviously, the cost of the demolition will swing things either way and whatever. I can understand that, but one of the things that often comes up is, have you done this before? Now, in the immediate aftermath of the Didcot disaster, the questions were raised about the fact that Coleman and Company had never taken down a power station before. Now, whether that had any impact on the actual demolition of the power of the boiler house that subsequently killed 4 people, we still don't know. 8.5 years later, we don't know. But the very fact that they were given that job based on no previous experience. How many companies have previous experience on oil rigs? There's probably 2 or 3 I can think of here in the UK. Not much more. Is that good? Is that good? And if, for example, if an Erith, who are brilliant, Keltbray, who are brilliant, McGee's, who are brilliant, if they were given one of these jobs, there's a there's probably 80% of me says they do a cracking job, but there's another 20% where you're thinking, "You've never done that before. How what are you basing everything on? What are you basing your RAMs upon? What are you basing your training upon? What are you basing your equipment portfolio upon? Or are you relying on all stuff you've done before? I've done a tower block, I can do an oil rig. Really? Our guys are trained to work at height on a building. They'll be okay on a rig. Really? Our equipment can take down a 22-story straight up and down building. It will take down an oil rig. Really? Can you imagine Americans looking at taking down rigs? Wouldn't even be an Eastern. Can you do it? Hesitation, possibly? Not sure. The fact that they say, have you done this before? Every structure or rig would be different. No job the same. In absolute truth, that's not dissimilar to tower blocks. Even tower blocks that are built side by side, there is often differences in the makeup and where the heaviest steel is and things like that. So that is not entirely new. But having never done anything like this before, Mick Norton says, I bet it's cheaper to tow the rig. I bet it's cheaper to tow the rig due for dismantling to a breaker's yard in the subcontinent of India. It probably is cheaper, but there are, I think we've got 2 or 3 facilities now. Obviously, the one that's just come into Pool up in, it's Hartlepool, isn't it? That one. Yeah, the Brent Charlie topside is arrived in Hartlepool for decommissioning. It's at the Able Seaton Port. Now, Able have done these before. They are one of the companies that I would say has certainly got lots of experience in this kind of thing. No, nothing more there. There are, I think there's 1 or 2 facilities up in Scotland as well. Sorry, my screen just went weird. If you are, I don't know, Bell, Shell or BP or whoever it is that owns these rigs, for a start, do you really want to send it to India? Because, as I said, those breaking yards in the subcontinent are not great for health and safety. If you're looking at the purely from a PR perspective, if you are Shell or BP, do you really want the potential death of 1 or more local workers in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan on your hands? You probably don't. Obviously, shipping it all the way to India wouldn't be particularly cheap. But then by the same token, would you not, if you were Shell or BP or whoever else manages these things, would you not be looking for some reassurance that the whoever is taking down these things has actually done it before, has got some experience, and has got, when you think about, Steve will back me up on this because he's been there, he's done this. When you think about the way in which the health and safety is managed on these offshore rigs, we are talking about multi-billion-pound companies here working in multi-trillion-pound industries, and their health and safety is to one of the highest standards. It's probably not quite on the par with the nuclear industry, but it will be pretty damn close. And yet, despite all of that, they are handing the dismantling of one of their former rigs to a company that potentially has never done it before or has never done that type before. Is that right? And it's the same argument. We keep coming back to the same argument that we had with the Didcot power station as well. I can't remember the name of the company that owned the Didcot power station or that operated the Didcot A power station. Neither here nor there, but they too will have had very exacting levels of health and safety within the facility itself to make sure that men and women were kept safe, and it operated for decades. And yet they handed the keys to a company that openly admitted, we have not taken down a power station before, with a suspended boiler in a boiler house. Is that really a good idea? Regardless of how the Didcot investigation pans out, surely somebody somewhere along the line is going to ask the question of the owners of the Didcot power station, why did you believe it to be a good idea to allow a company that has never done this before to do it here? Was it a cost thing? Did Coleman and Company offer them some exceptional reassurance? Don't get me wrong, Coleman and Company, when you think about some of the work they did at Birmingham New Street, fantastic, an absolute top-notch demolition company, but never done a power station before? That potentially could come back and bite the owner of the Didcot power station on the arse, because questions should be asked. 1 second. Gary Muirhead says, sorry, Mark, been pouring concrete this morning. Yes, Tenerife on the 25th of August, 4 weeks on Sunday. I think you get back just as I go off to the States, actually. Steve Williamson says, Nig in Invergordon. Nig in Invergordon, 20 minutes from my house, and Kishorn in West Highlands, about an hour away. Yeah, you are up in rig dismantling land, aren't you? No question about it. Mick Norton says, I worked briefly at the Able Yard you referred to years ago. One hell of a setup. Yeah, I've not been to it, but I know a couple of the guys at Able, and I've also sat through presentations that these guys have given. And Able, but they've done it before. This Brent Charlie topside platform that we're talking about, it's going to the Able Seaton Park, and Able have done it before. Had Veolia? I don't actually know the answer to that question. I'm asking the question. I heard the oil companies sell the rigs on, have nothing to do with the scrap. I think that was certainly the word in the industry when Veolia bought KDC. They basically wanted access to the scrap. I think that was pretty much the idea. The company that's never done that type of demolition work will sub out the specialist work. Will they? And I'm going to be purely because I know this one better. That's not what happened at Didcot. The Didcot Power Station project demolition was won as a joint venture between Coleman and Company and J. Bryan Victoria, or now JBV Demolition. And at the 11th hour, that joint venture was dissolved, and JBV, or J. Bryan Victoria, who had worked in the energy industry before, they were basically kicked to the curb for one reason or another. I don't know the details. They were kicked to the curb, and Coleman and Company progressed on their own. And they did not farm it out. They did it themselves. Steve says, Kishorn Port and Dry Dock is the former construction site of the Ninian Central Platform, which at over 60,000 tonnes is still one of the world's largest man-made movable objects ever moved across the face of the earth. Seems appropriate that these rigs should go full circle. They were built here, they go out, do their job, and then they come back to be dismantled. That certainly makes perfect sense. We can talk more about that, but I did have one other thing that I wanted to share with you, which is I need to stop that, and I need to show you something else. Bear with me for 1 second while I find the bit what I'm looking for. There we are. This is from Construction. Britain's pothole crisis is on a downward spiral. according to a National Audit Office report. According to the public spending watchdog, the increasing backlog in road maintenance work hinders local authorities in undertaking preventative maintenance work that could deliver better value for money. The Department for Transport, or the DFT, it appears, does not even know how bad things have got because it doesn't want to overburden local councils by demanding complete data from them. The National Audit Office, or the NAO, says the condition, this is a report called The Condition and Maintenance of Local Roads in England. Despite their importance, the condition of local roads is declining and the backlog to return them to a good state of repair is increasing. DFT has provided between 1.1 and 1.6 billion pounds of capital funding each year to local authorities and has set out plans for additional funding through 2034. Given the fiscal constraints, it is essential that DFT secures maximum value from the funding it has available. However, at present, DFT does not have a good enough understanding of the local condition of roads and does not use the limited data it does have to allocate its funding as effectively as possible. Managing the local road network is becoming increasingly complex. For example, as climate change and autonomous vehicles demand more from it, and the additional funding that DFT has secured provides an opportunity to equip local authorities to better meet these challenges. So, there's a bit of me that thinks the fine folks up at JCB with their Pothole Pro are probably rubbing their hands together now, thinking, "Oh, look at all these potholes that we're going to get to repair." And yet, there does appear to be a large gap in the process. We don't, I think, as private individuals, funnily enough, the road outside my house has just been resurfaced, so I don't have it anymore. But there's bits of my surrounding area here where I almost instinctively know where the potholes are and I drive accordingly to skirt around them and that kind of thing. But it appears that the local authorities do not have that at their disposal. One of the things that I find remarkable about this is the fact that there are, I wish I could remember the name of, there's one specific app where you as a private individual can download an app to your iPhone or your Samsung equivalent, and you can go out to your local road or on road nearby and you can take a photograph of a pothole. That app will then put a geotag on it and it will send it to the relevant local authority to report it so that it can be put into their queue for reporting. Bearing in mind we have that data, that app exists. It's not something that's coming in the dim and distant future. We have that app, we have that opportunity, and yet we don't know the local authorities don't know where the potholes are, and we don't know apparently how to fix them. Made me think of a thing. It was odd that we were speaking to Neil Edwards via Instagram earlier on. I had worked with Neil for about 15, 16 years. So over the course of that period, we probably worked together in the run up and the aftermath of probably 3 or 4, possibly 5 different general elections or minor elections. And one of the things that was very predictable with those elections was the freeing up of funds. Governments towards the end of their tenure at number 10 declare, "Oh, we've got no more money, we can't afford this and we can't afford that." And then somebody announces a general election and somebody reaches down the back of the sofa at number 10 and says, "Oh, we've just found an additional £1 billion to invest in the repair of roads. And we found another £1 billion to spend on schools or hospitals or whatever it might be." In the run up to an election, governments always find some new way to bring the general public back on side. Yes, we've been a bit crap for 3 years, but if you vote us back in again, we'll fix your local roads, your schools will be better, and so on down the line. That didn't happen this time. Now, there's a bit of me, the cynic in me, which is the biggest part. There's a bit of me that believes that is one of the reasons that Rishi Sunak actually called a snap election, because he had nothing more to give away. I think the cupboard basically is bare. There was no way of saying, yes, yeah, we have been a bit rubbish. We did make an absolute balls of the COVID crisis, and we did line the pockets of our cronies and stuff throughout the PPE crisis and everything else. However, if you vote for us again, we'll fix the hospitals, we'll give you more schools, and your roads will be like driving over the bottom of a baby. They didn't do that. And I seriously wonder now. I wonder, we've got new construction ministers. I'm sure we'll have new transport ministers and so on down the line. I wonder what they will have to work with, because my gut feeling tells me that the cupboard is bare. There is no more money to be had. Now, bearing in mind, we are apparently pissing 1.1 to 1.6 billion pounds of capital funding up the wall on road repairs and not knowing actually where that's going. Is that really a good way forward? Is that a good way forward? Is there any truth, says Gary Muirhead, is there any truth that electric cars in London will be charged £15 a day to enter the city? I hadn't heard that. Let me have a look. This is the nature of this part of the show. I'm not seeing any mention of that whatsoever. Yes, I am. Transport for London has announced plans. I'll show you what I'm looking at, actually. That would be a lot easier, wouldn't it? If I do away with that. Let me have a look. There we are. This comes from Cities Today, which I don't know. So I'm not stating categorically that this is news. This could be fake news, but I'll tell you what it says. Transport for London, TfL, has announced plans to charge electric vehicle owners the full daily congestion charge from December 2025. Currently, drivers of zero-emission vehicles pay £10 or $12.76 for a yearly exemption from the £15 daily charge, but from late next year will be liable for the full amount. The congestion charge's cleaner vehicle discount was part of our phased scheme to tackle London's toxic air, a TfL spokesman said. Ending the cleaner vehicle discount from 25th of December 2025 will maintain the effectiveness of the charge, which is in place to manage traffic and congestion in the heart of London. The move has been criticised by some environmental groups and the Federation of Small Businesses. Campaign group Clean Cities called the change puzzling, saying it could affect businesses. Our latest polling shows Londoners believe small businesses should have more support to help them switch to cleaner electric vehicles, says Oliver Lord of Clean Cities. Let's be absolutely clear here. If they do this, it's a travesty. But would anyone be surprised? The congestion charge and the ultra low emission zones are largely meaningless. Now, I do consider myself to be environmentally friendly. I would like my children and grandchildren to be able to breathe fresh air. That would be nice. But we have this conversation whenever we talk about zero emissions. What is the point of trying to fix emissions in the UK when China and India and America continue to belch toxic smoke into the atmosphere? You know, our tiny contribution will not make a big difference worldwide. Now, my take on that is every little helps and so on down the line. But when you're looking at something like the ultra low emission zones and you're looking at the congestion charge, obviously the original idea was partly the congestion charge was to make people think twice about taking their car into London. But at least equal and possibly more than that, it was a money-making exercise. It helps fund Transport for London. Even if everybody that travels into London used an electric vehicle, how much difference do you think that is going to make to the world's carbon emissions? Yes, there will be a tiny fraction of improvement. This is a money-making exercise. So my belief, my personal belief, is this has got nothing to do with the environment. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with congestion, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. This is purely a money-making exercise. Now, just going back to the business of congestion, if anybody's ever been to London anytime recently, you'll know that we have several cycle superhighways. So we've given over a part of an existing road. Now, bearing in mind that a lot of the roads in and out of London and serving within London were built way before we had cars and buses and trucks and stuff. But so we've got a finite amount of space and we've got these finite roads. But in their infinite wisdom, the Transport for London have decided we've got a 2-lane highway, but we're going to give over part of that to bicycles. And often, when you're walking around London, you come to one of these cycle superhighways, and there's not a bike to be seen. What there is, however, is just beyond that. There's a huge queue of cars because we already had congestion, which is why one of the reasons why we had the congestion charge. So rather than freeing up more space to ease congestion, in their infinite wisdom, they have reduced the size of the road to make way for bicycles. I like a bicycle ride. I like a bicycle ride around London. But is that really the most efficient way to serve a modern city? And if you have got a log jam of traffic, is reducing the width of the road actually helpful? Or are you just not making the bottleneck a whole lot worse? Steve Williamson says electric vehicles, as well as hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, are exempt from the London congestion charge. However, vehicle owners must register for the Cleaner Vehicle CVD discount to benefit from this exemption. As I say, one of my concerns with this news piece that I've got here is I've never ever heard. I'll throw it back up on the screen. I have never ever heard of Cities Today as a publication. So this might be one of these scaremongering Facebook pages that tells you things that turn out not to be true at all. Month we've had the electric car, love it. Don't think I'd go back to petrol or diesel car. So much nicer to drive, plenty of power, and charging in the Highlands is no problem. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, if somebody could wave a magic wand, a few supercars that I'd quite like to have, but yeah, I'd quite happily welcome a Tesla into this household. But it wouldn't change one important point. I wouldn't be driving in London anyway. I've got a train station that takes me into London in about 20 minutes, right at the end of my road. There's no way I'm driving in London at all. It's madness. It's chaos. Chris Ford says, I think you're saying what most people have known for a long time, that basically we're being scammed. Mostly people who live in London, but it's spreading. Yeah, I've said this before. One of the issues with this is that London is often used as the test bed. And almost if we can get away with it in London, we'll do it elsewhere. So things like the cycle superhighway, we did one here. So sooner or later, if they haven't got one already, Birmingham will get one, Manchester will get one, Newcastle, Leeds, Glasgow, and so on down the line. Ultra low emission zones, we pioneered them in London. Here in the UK, other places in the world have got them, but we pioneered them in London. And once we realised that people weren't going to take to the streets and hang Sadiq Khan from the highest lamppost, we rolled it out. Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, and so on down the line. And this could be exactly the same. You know, and if you're one of those people living in London and you've been out and spent 20, 30, 40 grand on an electric car to make sure you're exempt from the congestion charge and the ultra low emission zone charge as well, where do you stand? Where do you stand legally? Just because somebody, assuming that the Cities Today article is absolutely right, they've decided to move the goalposts. It's not your fault, is it? You bought your car in good faith to abide by the rules of the day, and now they're moving the goalpost. Should you not be entitled to some sort of compensation against that? That'd make them think twice. There we are. Anyway, that's the first time we've done this. I don't know what you made of it. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't know whether we'll be doing it daily, but maybe if we've got enough news to talk about. We had a couple of good ones to talk about today: potholes and oil rigs and electric cars and stuff. Let me know. Let me know in the chat if you like this kind of thing. We'll do it again. If you hated it and thought it was an absolute bore, we'll probably still do it and just to accept the fact that you're bored. I don't know. We'll see how we go. Steve says I prefer it this way. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. Yeah, as I say, I don't want to lose the ability to chat. That's why we keep the crack. But I do want to get to the show itself, the videos and everything else. I want to get to that quickly. But there's an awful lot going on in and around the industry that I do think it is worth sharing and discussing as well. Yeah, maybe we'll revisit this. If anything, it just gave me an opportunity to come up with a new jingle, which I quite liked. Let's have a look. Let's all go to America and drive big fat V8s. Not a bad idea. And it's better than talking absolute crap and non-relevant. Wow. Some of it was relevant. I'm not entirely sure all of it was, but the WhatsApp group can sometimes be WTF. Yeah, listen, I have actually removed a few bits and pieces from the WhatsApp group in the past couple of weeks. Partly because it had nothing to do whatsoever with anything that we do within the WhatsApp group, but also because, frankly, some of it was vaguely racist. Not on my watch. If you want to go and share that kind of stuff on, and I'm not talking to you, Steve, I'm talking to others. If you want to go and share that kind of stuff, do it on your own time. You're not doing it in my WhatsApp group because that's not my thing at all. Everybody, go and have a day. I'm going to go and take my wife for a cup of coffee because I think she deserved it. Everybody, have a good day. I'll be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. with the usual thing and maybe some of this. We'll see. See how it goes. Till then, everybody, have a good day. See you soon. All the best.